Hello and welcome to episode 52 of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
Thanks for joining us at the Page One podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process, how they got into the industry, and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. If this is your first episode, welcome. Please do check out the back catalogue of guests, because we've had some great guests on the podcast now, over 50. So hopefully there is a few that interest you, so please do check those out. And we've got another great guest this week.
We do. We are celebrating our season finale.
It is, yes.
Season 5 finale?
Yes, it's a very grand title to give it. Give what is essentially, we just want a small break before going
Mark was so very tired of editing.
Yeah, exactly. But we thought we'd release this one so that we can distract people from looking at maps on CNN all day.
Yes. Turn off the news and tune in to this week's chat with Daniel Abraham, who you may also know by his pen names, M. Ellen Hanover or James S.A. Corey.
One half of James S.A. Corey.
One half of James S.A. Corey, sorry. The other half, of course, being Ty Frank. And James S.A. Corey is the author of the Expanse novels, which I am a big fan of, both the novels and the TV show.
Yeah, they're both great. If you can watch the Expanse on Amazon Prime now, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And season 5 comes out next month.
Yeah.
Time of recording.
December 15th or 16th, I think, from memory. Yeah.
So it's a really great chat we have with Daniel. He's a really interesting guy and quite deep conversation at times. Yeah, no, it is. It's
really interesting hearing how he got into writing and, you know, what his journey has been. He's someone that has collaborated a lot with other writers. He's done a lot of, not just The Expanse, but other things, other projects as well, that he's worked with other people, but also on his own as well. He's published a lot of books. He's a screenwriter. He's written comics, and yeah, it's a really in-depth chat that we have with him. Really good fun, but really interesting as well. And we touch on lots of topics, including, you know, the power and dangers of social media. Maybe, you know, what is it like when someone decides
a tiny reminder, perhaps. Of,
exactly.
The dangers of social media.
Yeah, and actually his attitude is so refreshing. You know, because I think what a lot of authors have is people feel the need to tell an author when they don't like what they've written for some reason. But his attitude to it is very refreshing, and I think it's well worth listening to. And it's good social media advice, not just for authors, but for anyone, to be honest.
No, it's an excellent chat, and I think everybody will enjoy it. And we'll be back at the end for some more waffle after this short advert for the Page One notebook.
Enjoy.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page 1.
Did you always want to be a writer? Was that always your goal from when you were young?
Actually, yeah. The first kind of experience I had that I remember writing was in, I think, 5th grade. I would have been like 10 years old. And we had an assignment to do daily journaling. And I was doing little kind of very short, entirely juvenile horror stories and reading them to the class. And, that was fun. They liked it. I liked it. And then we had an assignment in middle school to write a short story that I really engaged with and enjoyed. So by the time I was in high school, I kind of knew that was what I was going to be trying to do. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that I'd be trying to do it as a way to pay bills or make money. That seemed optimistic, but I was dedicated enough to that as something that was important in my life that by the time I was probably a junior, or I think I was a junior in high school when I started there was a mentorship program they had at my high school where if you had a particular trade or career that you were interested in, they would try to match you up with somebody who did that. And then you could go spend some time and actually get some practical knowledge and understand it more deeply. And by the time I was there, I was looking for science fiction writers and wound up working for about a year with Fred Saberhagen, the guy who did the Book of Swords and the Berserker series.
Wow. Cool. But in the meantime, I think you got a degree in biology. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I didn't get an English degree. I was impressionable when I was a young man, and I came across a quote by Kurt Vonnegut. It was, "The English department of a university is where literature disappears up its own asshole." And I don't know that that's true. I think that's in retrospect, that seems harsh, but I was really impressed by it at the time. So I decided not to be an English major because, Kurt Vonnegut. Mm-hmm. And I was not a great student. So it took me 8 years to get my undergraduate degree, full-time. I was there the whole time. And I started off as a math major, but then it turned out you had to do all the homework, and I didn't like that part. So I did biology because I was talented at it. I was able to go in and listen to the lecture and kind of understand what they were getting at and see what they were saying. And I didn't actually have to read the textbook in Bio 101. And I thought that's clearly the right way to go. So yeah, biology degree from there. Also, the cute girl was sitting in biology, and I wanted to hang out with the cute girl.
And you then worked for 10 years in tech support, is that right?
I wound up doing almost 10 years in tech support. I did a couple of years in retail. I was working at bookstores. I don't know that I was a great employee, but I was there, and that was soul destroying and awful. So I switched over to tech support as a way to go up from retail.
Angry and people phoning you up, and yeah.
And this whole time, are you still thinking? Are you still writing on the side for pleasure? Are you still mulling stuff over in your head?
Actually, when I got my first tech support job, it was at a local mom and pop internet service provider, and the people I was working for were people I knew, and they were science fiction and fantasy fans. They had like as many books as I did, and were as well read in the field as I was. And at my interview, I said, "Look, I love you guys. I would love to work here. This would be a great job for me. But I'm applying to Clarion West, and I'm going to need 6 weeks off in a year and a half. and they like knew what Clarion West was, and thought that would having somebody on staff who had been to Clarion would be one of the Clarions would be a giggle. So yeah, I got my 6 weeks off a year and a half in advance because they were already clear that this was something I was doing and it was important to me, and they supported me.
Excellent. Well, that if you have to do a day job, then that sounds like the sort of supportive bosses that you want, definitely.
Yeah, the place that I worked, it is an incredibly difficult job, and there are not better people to do it for than the ones I was working with.
Sounds like it. And am I right in saying that you, in terms of your published work, you started first with sort of shorter stories? Is that right, before you moved on to novels?
The path that I took was actually kind of a traditional one for the time. I don't know if it's still as much a thing, of kind of honing a bunch of craft skills on short stories and making a little bit of a name for yourself in short stories, and then kind of using that as leverage to get into novels. And I know that there are a lot of different paths and a lot of different ways. That was the one that I took, and it worked out pretty well for me there. And that said, I was writing novels very early. I was writing novels, in college and while I was doing tech support. It's just they were bad, so they didn't get published because they were bad. And then eventually, by the time I had sort of gotten short stories under control and gotten a career going that way and a name, a little tiny bit of a name, the novels were considerably less bad. So when the time came, I was ready.
When you wanted to make that jump from the short stories into the novels, how did you go about that? Because I presume you've obviously made a bit of a name for yourself in the short story world. You've shown you can write stuff, you can put stuff in the kind of publishing sphere. But did you go down that route yourself, or did you go and try and find an agent?
Well, the way that it worked for me was the short stories led very directly to an agent. I sold short story to Realms of Fantasy, which at the time was being run by Shauna McCarthy, who was also an agent. So Shauna saw the story and said, "Hey, this is pretty good. Do you by any chance have a novel?" And I said, yes, I do. And I sent her my novel. And she said, "This is very nice. Do you have a novel that is saleable?" And I said, "No, I do not." And
why was that novel not saleable?
That novel was contemporary fantasy with a lot of kind of obscure Gnostic and religious overtones, and it was in the vein of kind of Jonathan Carroll and Graham Joyce, and it was just not a market for it at that moment. And it was also not my best work. And so I talked to Shauna about what she thought was saleable, what kind of pathways made sense in the market. And this is the plan was always, and has remained, make a list of the things that I think I would like to do, and then talk to folks who understand the business end about which of those to start with. Right. One of my favorite pieces of kind of career advice when it comes to writing is from F. Scott Fitzgerald, who said, "Never marry for money. Go where the money is, then marry for love." So I'm trying to find the things that I don't want to chase the market, because that never ever works. The only things I have done cynically chasing the market have been the ones that failed. The things that I have succeeded in have always been the ones that were not chasing the market. But also knowing what the market is and knowing of the things that I'm in love with at the moment, which of them is most exciting to editors and agents, that helps me pick what the next project is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it is, as you say, it's a clever way to think about it, because definitely if you try and write something that you're not engaged with, but you think that's what people want, it's never going to be your best work.
No, and there's always a lag too.
Mm-hmm.
I knew a lot of people who were breaking into urban fantasy right as urban fantasy was beginning to wobble and collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a year and a half, 2 year lag between finishing a book and seeing it actually come out. In that time, what people are buying, what fashions are, it's gonna shift.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the professional gambler end of the being a writer. It's not actually my favorite part. We spend a lot of time talking about publishing and career management, and not a lot of time, or not. I feel like not as much time as we used to talk about the craft of writing.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that has changed in the time that I've been working. One of the things that's happened within the span of my career.
I mean, we really saw that, I think, with some things like Twilight and Hunger Games. When there was that real big kind of cultural boom of a product came out, everybody chased that, and the number of vampire books that were sent to agents after Twilight, etc., trying to chase that gold. But you're right. You're so far behind it. By the time you send something in, you've missed the boat by the time that book will ever come out.
By the time, the window will almost always have closed.
Yeah.
I mean, and you can see that with things like I don't remember Name of the Rose, Umberto Eco's first. No, there is no reason that should have been an international bestseller. There is zero reason that should have been what it was. But then it was, and then a bunch of people were trying to think, oh, that's what sells. I'm going to write like Umberto Eco, and they couldn't because they weren't Umberto Eco. And so you wind up with a bunch of Umberto Eco knockoffs, and about 2 years after the fact, that all sank like a stone. Nobody knows them.
Yeah, I mean, you see that, you do see. I suppose that's true across all sort of creative stuff, because you see it in TV as well. When Lost was a hit, everyone wanted to make the next Lost, and it's never
the big event TV show.
It's moved on by then, sort of a thing. Yeah. So chasing that thing is always going to be an impossible thing to do, I suspect. And so when you did the short stories, and then you started publishing novels, but you also began collaborating, I think, quite early on with other people as well. Or have you always done that? Is that something that you've always?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed that part. That was actually when I was at Clarion West back in '98. I co-wrote a story with one of the other students there. I wrote afterwards, I think, a couple of short stories with several people. And it's just a different spin on the game. It's a different way to approach story, and a different way to kind of see a project through somebody else's eyes, and see what they know and what their instincts are. I've always, well, I won't say I've always found that very interesting. There's some of the, some collaborations are better than others, but having that be part of what my creative process is, it's worked out for me really well.
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, and what is the difference in approach? So if you're writing something yourself, how do you go about it? Are you a big planner, or do you have an idea and just go for it?
That part often is actually weirdly similar.
Right. Okay.
Whether I'm collaborating or not. The way that I'm a skeptic of the idea that there are architect gardeners. That's kind of the thing you always hear. There's people who just go by the seat of their pants, and then there are people who meticulously plan things out, and they're two very different. They're not really actually different. Those are what you're doing in either of those is you're thinking your way through the story. You're imagining your way through the story. And either you're doing that by writing a shitty first draft, which is a perfectly legitimate way to go, or you're doing it by kind of chewing it over before you write your draft. But those are all the doodles that you make on the page, while the work is imagining the story deeply and richly in your head, so that when you get to the final draft, you have this experience to report on the page. The way I usually go is I outline what I think the story is, and then I start writing it until the outline is clearly wrong, and then I write another outline based on what the story is, and then I write until that's clearly wrong, and then I just kind of iterate that through. And it's all just a way to help me imagine the scenes and hear the voices and smell the rain wherever I am, and have the kind of thread of that experience in my head, so that when it's time to write the final draft, when it's time to edit it down to the right thing, I have that memory. I've created that false memory that I can then report.
But is that process sometimes made easier if you've got someone that you're working with? You know, I'm sure we all, when we are have that idea for the story and are thinking it through and are outlining it, or however we approach it, you'll hit bits where you're like, wait, you've sort of written yourself into a corner almost, even if it's only in a plan. But if you've got someone else there, does that sometimes help, that you can say, wait, hold on, look at this, have we boxed ourselves in here, can we come at it from a different angle?
The thing that's wonderful about collaborating with somebody, one person or a team or however, is they don't have your blind spots.
Yeah.
The things that bore the shit out of me don't bore the shit out of Ty Frank.
Yeah.
I don't care about action. I don't care about action. I find action dull. Ty is really good at it. Ty is really good at choreographing action. He's really good at finding what is interesting and what is revelatory in that moment. I'm much more interested in what happens before and what happens after. And so having somebody who can say, yeah, but if you do it this way, then the fight actually means something, and here's what the fight means. It's like, oh, that, I don't, that's not my instinct. So having somebody who has a different set of instincts and a different set of blind spots, such that my weaknesses get filled in, the little holes I have get buoyed up. It's not just something that makes the project better, it's something that makes me better. It helps me learn as a writer, because I get to see what Ty does really well, or what Narain does really well, or what any of the folks on the other side of the desk can do that I can't. And then I learn how to do that. I can think, well, even when I'm no longer in that project, I can say, well, I don't like this, but if I were Ty, what would I do? And I have this little Ty homunculus in the back of my head, and it can tell me what Ty would do, and then it's better than what I would have done myself.
Yeah,
the downside of collaboration is always that you have to give up having it be what it would have been if you were doing it yourself. The sense of ownership and of kind of obsessive compulsive perfection and egoism that goes into creating something that is entirely of your own, you gotta let that go, or the collaboration can't work. And that's turns out that's something I'm good at, but there's still moments when it's like, yes, but I wanted to do it that way. Okay, well, all right. More so on the screenwriting than the novel stuff, but
well, I mean, Ty Frank is obviously the person who you've written the Expanse books and the TV show, which is the big massive event show that everyone watches, and that's season 5, I think, is out at the end of this year. And I did want to touch on that kind of collaboration which you guys have, which has been so massive. And how did that come about? How did you guys first start working? Am I right in saying it was an RPG you guys had worked on?
It
first?
Was well, the first thing that happened So this is I'll tell the whole story here. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and one of the things about Albuquerque, New Mexico, is we have a university here, University of New Mexico, that has a really, really good architecture program, and isn't very expensive. So when Ty's wife, in her 30s, decided that she was going to get her architecture degree, they looked around and found the University of New Mexico, and they decided to move here. As it happened, we have a friend in common, Emily Ma, who is a writer in her own right, and who was part of a critique group that I was in at the time. And Emily came to the critique group and said, "Hey, my friends are moving to town, and Ty has sold a short story. He's a writer and would like to come to the critique group. Everybody be nice to him." So Ty came and we were all real nice to him, and we got to know each other through that and through kind of the local writing community. And he was running a role-playing game, and it's one he'd been working on for years. And he was running it mostly in Santa Fe, which is about an hour north of Albuquerque. And he was running it for folks like, George R. R. Martin was in that. Melinda Snodgrass, who worked on Next Generation, was in there. And Ian Tregillis, who's got just a bunch of books. Bunch of the writing community up there were in the game. But I had a new baby, and so I couldn't go play games in Santa Fe. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't be away from home for that long. And so Ty very kindly offered to run an instance of the story in Albuquerque for me and my wife and his wife. So just 3 players at his house, and we could just go do that. And then the kid could come, and when the kid got faunchy, we could put her down, she could sleep. And we played that we didn't play that many times. We played probably 3 or 4 sessions of that. And he had done all this world building. He had this immense depth of knowledge about this universe and kind of the politics of it and the structures of it. And I could ask him anything from, what the corridors looked like on Sirius Station to what the exchange mechanism was for debt going from the belt to Earth banks. And he knew. And I was like, he did all the hard part. Let's just write this down,
Yeah.
And so I said, "Hey, do you want to write?" And my image at the time, my idea for how this would work would be, he knew this universe. I knew how to write books. I'd already had like 4 or 5 books out. I'd just go over to his place. He'd tell me what happened. I write it, and then we'd accrue that until it was a book. And I did the first chapter, the prologue for what became Leviathan Wakes, and I showed it to him, and he said, "This is really good, but it's not right." And so he wanted to try writing the book too. And before this, he had published a short story.
That was
one.
It. Mm-hmm.
That was it. That was his. And so I, sure. So the first book we wrote mostly on Wednesdays, because that was his day off work. And we would get together and we would outline the things that happened in one chapter, and then the thing that happened in the chapter after that. He'd write one, I'd write the other. We'd switch. Each of us would read through and edit what the other guy had done. Mm-hmm. And then we'd put it on the back of the master document, and that's like 6,000 words a week. And it doesn't take that long to get a novel that way. And then the plan was we would sell that for, $5,000 to Tor and get some pizza and call it a day.
And it didn't quite work out.
Unfortunately.
Really, really overshot. We really overshot.
And when you are writing a story like that, because also your fantasy books are the same, when you're writing a big epic saga, it may not start out as that in your head, but how much of it is, like, how much of the whole scope of the thing have you got an idea at the start that yeah, and then this could happen, and then that, it's sort of far away in the distance. We might get there one day, or are you just planning on that one book at a time?
It varies depending on the project, but generally, I've got, I guess, 4 multi-book series that I've done at this point. In almost all of them, I have known what the ending was going in.
Right. Okay.
So the Long Price Quartet, I knew what the project was. I knew what the structure was. I knew what the ending was when I started book 1. And the details in between were pretty fuzzy and changeable and, changed a lot. But I knew what that was. With the Dagger and the Coin fantasy series, I knew what that was going in. I actually did a lot of work up front, not just myself, but with the local community. One of the things we do around here is we have things called plot breaks,
Right.
where if you have a project and you're thinking your way through it and you want to kind of have the advantage of that collaborative foment, you get some friends together, you buy them dinner, and we all sit around and talk about what the project is and what's interesting about it and what chimes off of you and what you don't want to do, and it helps clarify what the project is in your mind. I did that not just for the Dagger and the Coin books, but for epic fantasy as in general. Before I did the Dagger and Coin books, I did something called the Symposium, where I got a bunch of people: S.M. Sterling, Ian Tregillis, Melinda Snodgrass, George R.R. Martin, and we all went over to Melinda's place for probably a 7 or 8 hour day and talked about what epic fantasy is and what it's about and what its roots are and what it does well and what it does poorly, and just kind of chewed through what the project of epic fantasy is. And then with that in mind, then went on to talk about days later about what this particular 5-book series was. But I knew going in it was a 5-book series. I knew what it was going to be. With The Expanse, we did the first book thinking, yeah, this is fun. This is a one-off. But when it came time to sell it, it's easier to sell when there's the promise that there might be more if it goes well. So we came up with some ideas for what we could do next if we did something next. And they were interested in getting that. But by the time we were working on book 2, Leviathan Wakes had already been nominated for the Hugo, and it was looking like maybe the project had legs. And we talked to our publisher and said, hey, if you just want 3, we can wrap it up in 3. We can get to an ending if you want to do it in 3. If you want more than that, you should say so. And they said, oh yes, let's do more. And so Ty and I, while we were working on book 2, did kind of a map of what the whole project would be. And there were 2 versions of that. There was one that was 12 books long, and there was one that was 9 books long. And we looking at the 2 of them, we kind of decided the one with 12 books had this sort of mushy section in the middle. So we cut that out. And then we went with the 9-book version. And you can, if you read the books, you can kind of see where those 3 Vamping Spinning the Wheels books would have been. But we just didn't write them because they were boring.
Fair enough.
But we knew from the time we were doing the second book what the last scene of the last book was going to be.
Oh, awesome. And I think it's fair to say that across both your fantasy and your sci-fi stuff, I think writing that kind of world is often prone to exposition dumps, which I think you guys avoid doing. And I kind of wanted to ask what your best method of avoiding that is, because I know I read in an interview you said that having worked on the Expanse TV show, it kind of gave you a different understanding of storytelling and how to get that information across. And I also wondered if working on the TV show version of the Expanse has changed the way you write books, and whether that changes, because obviously the way that you exposition something in a TV show is very different from a book. And does all that kind of tie in together and change the way that you tell those kind of stories?
I like to think I have a much bigger toolbox than I had when I started doing the TV show. There are some things you can do in prose, especially with exposition and internal monologue, that are incredibly powerful and don't translate at all to the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
There are some things that are specific to prose that make prose a different and better way to approach some kinds of narrative issues. There are some things that you get for free in filmed entertainment that you cannot recreate in prose. And understanding what those are and seeing how they work has been enlightening for me, just over and over and over again. But that said, I think the beauty of prose is that it has these strengths and it has this experience that it creates in the reader that you can't get anyplace else. And the tools that support that, I think, are things that we really should embrace. I don't think a good book is a TV script written for the reader. I don't think that a good TV show is a book that gets shoehorned into a form that fits in front of a camera. I think they're different things.
Yeah.
So I think as a storyteller, I think I'm in a much better place than I was when I started. But I don't think that it has changed my process with prose. I don't think it's changed what I do with words and chapters and story structure. The thing that has changed, the thing that did happen, isn't specific to screenwriting. It's specific to the people I'm working with. Our showrunner on The Expanse is a man named Narain Shankar. And, talking about collaboration, everybody recognizes that me and Ty work together and we collaborate, and that's true. But a writer's room is also a collaboration. It's a much larger collaboration. And, Dan Nowak, who's been the writer who's been with us since the beginning, is absolutely a part of the show. Narain Shankar is the showrunner. Ultimately, we work on his show.
Mm-hmm.
He does not work on ours.
Yeah.
And working with him for the last 5 years and seeing the attention to detail and the dedication to the craft and the way that he is willing to spend hours, with color correction and sound balancing and doing things that are almost subliminal to get the show, 1% better. 1% better because of the color correction, 1% better because of the VFX design, 1% better because of over and over and over. And the way that iteration elevates the whole project, it's so easy to just be a little bit lazy. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to just not really focus, on, the rhythm of your words. Yeah, you don't have anything egregious, you're fine. But watching the way that he approaches his craft with such thoroughness and such dedication has made me more self-conscious about doing that with my prose. Yeah. And I think to my benefit, I think seeing his creative work has made my creative work, has raised the bar for my creative work. So that's the thing that I think working on the show has changed.
And it sort of linked to the Tarek's point about the exposition stuff. One of the things that struck me when I read Leviathan Waits for the first time was, it doesn't. I've read sci-fi novels before where you get introduced to the character, but then you have this sort of whole background of what the universe state is or whatever. It gives you a big detail of it, whereas it just drops you straight into it in Leviathan Wakes, and you go from there, and you kind of learn as you go. Is that your approach always? Do you think that's the best approach rather than sort of taking time out to describe things to people?
I won't say that there's a best approach.
Okay.
I don't think there is a single best approach. I think there is a best approach for a project.
Mm-hmm.
I think each project has the things that it needs from you. and figuring out what those things are is kind of the job. I think there is absolutely a place for vast expository dumps. I think if you go back and read the first 4 or 5 pages of A Christmas Carol, Dickens, that's an info dump. That's the narrator turning to you and just telling you what the background is and how it all works. You don't even meet a character for pages. And it's charming because the narrator has such an engaging voice and is playing with you and playing games and commenting on things. And there are ways to do info dumps that are tremendously successful. There are ways to do it that are wooden and boring. Not making it wooden and boring, that's your job.
Yeah.
With The Expanse, I mean, if you look at The Expanse, there's actually a fair amount of info dump in there. There are a fair number of passages in there where we turn to you and say, here is Tycho Station. Here is its history. But hopefully we did it in a way that you didn't exactly notice that we were doing that.
Yeah.
Because we were charming about it. That was what we were aiming for.
Yeah, I think maybe, as you say, it's getting the reader to sort of buy into the voice, and if they're happy being told the story by that voice, then it can go anyway.
Then you can have pages and pages of exposition, and if it's fun to read, nobody will count you down for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that could sound a craft. That could sound to the conversation about craft. That is, I think, the bedrock of all of the later conversations about publishing and career management and art. I think really what we do almost always boils down to how do you make the person engaging with your prose enjoy the experience.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And when you have a big epic story that you're telling, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi, do you map stuff out? Do you have charts? Do you have of the world or the characters, or is that all kept in your head, or do you have stuff written down that you, like a Bible, that you go back to?
I have a notebook of scribbles and sentence fragments and phrases that are supposed to kind of remind me what I was thinking of. And every now and again, a really good sentence, because I should have that in mind when I get there. But I'm not, I don't really like do, I guess I have done some charts. I have done some things where it was like thinking my way through something. If there was some particular issue that seemed like I needed that kind of doodle in order to really internalize it.
Yeah.
But ultimately I'm trying to internalize it. Ultimately because as with film, prose is one thing at a time across time, right? It's this image and this dialogue and then this thing that you're imagining. What we're doing when we write prose is we're telling people what to imagine and what order to imagine it in. It's what we're doing is more like guided meditation than anything else. And we're giving those instructions and understanding the flow of what to imagine and what to imagine and what to imagine. If you're asking people to imagine 3 things at the same time, you're probably not writing good prose. So having that very narrow focus, that one frame at a time vision of it, that's my job. And if I understand the world deeply, it's easier for me to richly and fully imagine what it's like to be in that particular plaza at that particular time with those particular people with that particular dragon, right? And that's the moment that I'm trying to evoke in whoever's reading the book.
And does it sometimes sorry, Tarek. Does it sometimes take you a while to find that voice for the story that you're wanting to tell. You know, if you've been writing Expanse, but then you change to a different story, do you have to take your time to say, right, what is this? You know, what is this story? Where am I going with it, and how am I going to tell it?
Yes and no. It took it, and I'm gonna generalize here. It takes a very, very, very long time to find voice and to control voice and to get comfortable with that part of the craft. And I did that a whole lot in my 20s and early 30s. I'm 50 now. I'm pretty good at it. I've had a lot of practice.
Yeah.
So at this point, picking up a new project and finding whose voice I'm speaking in and how the story wants to be told is much more intuitive and much more internalized and much more. But that's because I did like 15, 20 years of work back in the day to get where I could do that. That's not a thing that comes naturally. It's something that you can make come naturally if you spend just a lot of time and effort thinking about it. And I'm kind of there right now, with the caveat that I'm still figuring stuff out. I hope I'm not done.
Yeah.
But I'm better than I used to be. It takes me a lot less time now.
Yeah, fair enough. And when you're writing in these worlds of like sci-fi and fantasy, obviously there is, especially with something like The Expanse, there's there's a lot of fans who all have opinions about things. Do you, how do you find that? Do you enjoy engaging with the fans? Sometimes these things can go slightly the wrong way as they become too big, if I can put it nicely.
No,
you know,
there's a joy in talking to people who like your stuff, and there's a necessary distance and kind of a callous that you have to have too. I mean, the fact of the matter is, people who read my book and who tell me what it was like for them aren't actually telling me about my book.
Yeah.
They're telling me about the performance of my book that they made for themselves. And that's not actually my responsibility. I don't have any power over that. So somebody who comes up to me and says, I read your book and it was really fucking boring, I think, well, you're not a very good reader. That's cool. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Or I'm not your cup of tea.
Yeah.
You know, the way that you imagine things and the way I imagine things don't sync up real well, and it wasn't rewarding for you. Okay, that's cool. But again, this goes back to kind of the egotism of writing, the ego of putting your story out there. And then if you need the praise, and we all need the praise a little bit, I mean, but if you can't get enough of that, you shouldn't ever do this. You should never talk to a fan. You shouldn't get on get on Reddit. You shouldn't go to Goodreads. You shouldn't read your Amazon, because that, if it hurts, it will hurt you. And if it makes you really happy and full of yourself, that will hurt you too. There's have you read Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird?
No.
Brilliant book about the experience of being a writer. And one of the things she talks about is radio KFKD, which is the left side is the constant criticism and self-doubt, and the right channel is all of this sugary praise about how wonderful you are. And it's called radio KFKD because if you listen to either channel, you're fucked. And engaging with fans, engaging with feedback of any kind really invites that experience.
Yeah.
And and a certain amount of it's really nice. And if you can do that, that's awesome. And if you take it too personally, you ought not. I'm good at not taking it personally. Somebody can tell me that I'm a terrible writer, and I'm fine with that. Somebody can tell me I'm a wonderful writer. I'm fine with that too. It's not really about me at that point.
I just don't understand people that feel the need to, to like tag a writer on Twitter and say this is really shit.
Well,
what's the point in doing that? Apart,
well,
I don't.
The point of Twitter, the point of social media in general, is being paid attention to. I mean, anybody who puts a tweet out ever for any reason is ultimately saying, "Hey, look at me." That's the subtext for all of it, and that counts for me too. That counts for anybody, and to a degree, anybody who writes is participating in that same impulse. Why do you have, why tag somebody and say your work was shit? Well, because you're Dorothy Parker. That was her whole career. That was what she did. She did it in print. She did it in prose. She did it with tremendous style and wit. And so we still remember her, even if we don't remember some of the people she was critiquing.
Yeah.
Because she was really good. The guys on Twitter are not that good. The guys on Reddit, they're not Dorothy Parker. We're going to forget them in a minute. But that sense of egotism and attention monitoring and it's the same. We're humans. It's what we do.
Yeah.
I suppose what they think if they tag the author directly in it, then there's less chance of it going into the void and more chance of it being noticed or drawing more attention to it.
And you're going to be noticed by somebody who matters to you. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about the asymmetry in writing is that reading a book is a tremendously intimate experience. You're actually, like I said, you're imagining this thing. You have this absolutely internal experience, this unshareable experience. The closest person you have to the person who shares that experience is the author. Now, the author doesn't know you from Adam. It's an entirely one-way relationship. But I've had very meaningful interactions with dead people because I read their books. It's very easy when you have spent hundreds of hours in somebody's company to think that you have a relationship with them. And if somebody has written something that pissed you off, you kind of feel like you know them.
Yeah.
You don't, but you feel like you do. And I think there's a lowering of inhibition there because of that sense of intimacy, because of that sense of connection.
Yeah. And there was an interesting thing that I read that I think you said a while back, where you were talking about readers who read genre work like sci-fi or fantasy, and you're basically saying that there's nothing's more important than the other. What's more important? The most important thing is that people enjoy what they read, regardless of what the genre is. That's the take-home message, really. And I think there is. I've certainly noticed in the book world more than the TV world, I think, but in the book world, there's definitely a bit of snobbery around certain genres. And I think it was Margaret Atwood said that she didn't write sci-fi. When you look at The Handmaid's Tale and Oryx and Crake, and it's hard to not see that as sci-fi dystopia stuff. And it's almost like, is there a barrier for some people do they look down on certain areas, you think? And is that changing as time goes on?
There's fiction is a social human endeavor, and because of that, all of the bullshit that we have out in the world is absolutely going to come in here. You can't take them away. And one of the things we do is we worry about status. We worry about whether we're more important than the next fella. And there's absolutely people who are worried about what their writing or their reading says about them as a person to people around them. There's I think a whole genre of books that are there not to be read, but to prove that you went to college, because I'm the kind of person who reads this. And there's a bunch of things that are really low status genres that are only read for pleasure because there isn't a payoff for status. There is the social hierarchy that says, "Oh my God, you read that book, you must be really smart," and that doesn't just come down on science fiction or fantasy. I was teaching a workshop up in Calgary in Canada years ago, and there was a woman who said, "How can I make sure that my work isn't mistaken for romance?" And I said, "Well, romance has a larger readership, more money. What are you doing here? Why do you not want that?" And it's because romance is a lower status genre than science fiction or mystery. So all of the prejudices, and romance is a lower status genre, mostly because we have just a lot of misogyny in the culture, and that is the genre that is associated with women readers and women writers, and so it can't be serious. And that is our contempt for women coming through. We don't, we think of science fiction and we think of the nerdy 15-year-old kid who has the thick glasses, and that's not at all who the readership is, but that's kind of the impression of it. And that is our contempt for that kid being expressed in our contempt for science fiction. There's a tremendous amount of contempt that we have for one another, and the expression of that as contempt for what art we create, what art we enjoy, is a measure of our failures of empathy toward each other, and our kind of internalized fear of being the person who's getting the fuzzy end of that lollipop.
I mean, it is. It's something that always. There's definitely I feel in certain parts of the media, in a book review column, it will always be the literary novel that sits higher than any genre novel of any type. Even though you can get genre novels that are, brilliantly written, have great characters, really deep characters, but they're kind of just dismissed because of the story they're telling, which just...
Well, and not even necessarily the story they're telling. Let me give you an example. Imagine a story about an alien race that comes to Earth and uses plastic surgery to sculpt one of their kind into looking like a really attractive woman, who then goes and is a hitchhiker and grabs men to take back to a secret lair where they get fattened up to be a delicacy that's fed to aliens in other worlds. That's science. That's like the most science fiction of science fiction, right? That's a literary novel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the movie adaptation of Under the Skin was very, very literary as well.
Yes. So what are we talking about here? If that's literature, and Ursula Le Guin is science fiction, and M.K. Jemisin is genre, we're just making shit up at this point, right?
Absolutely.
That's not a meaningful distinction anymore, except that it's not actually a conversation about the books. It's actually a conversation about people's self-image and their relationship to art.
So is it coming down to people themselves who are running these reviews, etc., gatekeepers who are deciding what types of work is and isn't accepted? Is it a personal thing as opposed to the actual product itself? Then,
Oh, always, it always has been. That's the curating and gatekeeping and all of that is ultimately an express, and that is an art in itself. That is a kind of a meta sort of art, but that is about the personality and beliefs of the curator.
mm-hmm.
I mean, all of those. I mean, and I'm going to use a kind of a cheesy example here, but you remember all of those Alfred Hitchcock Presents things we maybe you guys are younger than I am, but there were anthologies of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and all of those were about the story of Alfred Hitchcock and what Alfred Hitchcock meant. Any review site is about the story of what that reviewer means. All of Dorothy Parker's stuff, like I was saying, it's not about, you don't read Dorothy Parker to understand the books that she was reviewing better. You read it because you're a fan of Dorothy Parker. You don't. I've always wanted there to be, and if I ever get to the point where I'm really ready for my career to be over, I may do this. I want the website that reviews reviewers, right? I want the one that's like that all literature is subject to critical interpretation and examination, except book reviews. I think and they're just as much writing as anything else. They're just as much an art form as anything else. And understanding what makes a review good, what makes a review interesting, that's a fascinating question. And I would love to be able to take examples from review sites and say, okay, so what is this person telling us about themselves? What is this person telling us about their beliefs in literature? What makes this review a good review? And I understand it's a little ironic that I started off this conversation with the Kurt Vonnegut quote about literature disappearing up its own asshole, and now here I am just totally advocating for a colonoscopy of a website, but I live in the tension. I don't know.
We look forward to that when it comes out. But you to change tack, you've obviously you've written novels, you've written you've done screenwriting as well, and you've also done some graphic novels as well. How do you enjoy switching between the different types of writing? Do you find it a different challenge, or
they all frustrate me in different ways.
Right.
I find them all frustrating differently. The screenwriting is it's a completely different toolbox than the one I'm used to working with. And you can kind of tell that when you read my scripts. My scripts read like somebody who spent too much time writing prose. I have a bunch of bad habits, that are really appropriate for prose that are terrible for screenwriting. So I need to tack against that. For graphic novels, I'm still trying to get my feet under me with graphic novels. I don't think I've quite understood how to do a really good graphic novel script, but I got some things I would like to try to get better with that one. The prose is where I feel most comfortable, but even that has days that are like that it's not doing what I want it to do. So yeah, I think all of them are related but separate projects. And all of them have their own rewards and their own frustrations. The thing about making television that is actually most like writing isn't screenwriting. The thing that's most like writing in television or film is film editing.
Right. Yeah.
That last pass before it goes, where you kind of the last rewrite of the story before it goes out to the audience. Because when I'm writing a story or a novel, there's like very little between me and the audience. there's a copy editor, there's some formatting, and then mostly it's just me talking straight to them.
Mm-hmm.
When you're writing a screenplay, you are miles from
Yeah.
the final product and from your final audience. And by the time it comes out, it will have been through so many different other artists who are doing their work you really, if a few of your lines actually make it to the final cut, you've done good.
And you've also done franchise work, tie-in work for things like Star Wars, the Game of Thrones. And is it do you enjoy jumping into other people's worlds and playing in their sandbox, or is it more fun creating your own stuff?
It varies a lot. The Game of Thrones one was interesting because that was actually an adaptation. I wasn't the project for that was making the graphic novels out of the first book of Song of Ice and Fire, and the point of that one was for me to vanish. It was supposed to be as much as possible George's script, George's story and words, and then Tommy's art. And if you noticed that I was there at all, it was because I failed. But that was fascinating. Having something where the point was to be invisible was really interesting. With the Star Wars book, that was kind of a lark. That was for fun. That was a thing where we got to take kind of the best version of Han Solo in Han Solo's arc, and the kind of free-ish hand to tell a story and kind of revisit that. It's frustrating because it's very constrained. And it's not something where all of our, we spent a long time arguing about what exactly the story was that we were permitted to tell. The pitch that we first had, we didn't get to quite do this. There, you can see some of the bones in it, what we finally did do. But we wanted to tell the story where in the Star Wars universe between New Hope and Empire, there were rumors of an Imperial droid designer who was maybe thinking about switching sides and defecting. And Han Solo had to sneak in behind enemy lines to find him, only to discover it was not the designer who was gone rogue, but the droids who were then going to destroy all organic life in the galaxy. And he had to go to this ancient world where the droids were uncovering an ancient weapon that would destroy anything that wasn't a droid, because then you could have had Han Solo retiring replicants in an ancient temple, and it would have been perfect. Right? And we didn't get to do that, but
that's a great shame. That would have been excellent.
yeah, right?
So I think I'm right in saying that the final Expanse book is out next year. Is that right? Is it?
That is the plan.
Yeah. Leviathan Falls, is that the title?
Leviathan Falls is the last novel.
Yeah, but that's what I was going to ask. I mean, this is the last novel of the saga. I take it you will always leave open the chance to dip your toe in that water again if you want to.
No.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No. The last book is the last book. There's a 10th volume,
right?
That is the novellas and short stories collected that are in that universe, and then that's done.
Okay.
That's over. I have no interest in going back to that. Ty has no interest in going back to that. Good stories end. I really my frustration with Star Wars, just to bite the hand that feeds me, is I have come to the understanding that it is no longer a story. It is now a subgenre.
Yeah.
There will be no satisfying ending to the Star Wars stuff ever. The way that this will work, and that's fine. I liked X-Files too, and that didn't go anywhere. And I think when you give up having an ending, you actually give up something kind of precious.
Mhm.
I think that the sense of a meaningful conclusion to a story is, for me anyway, that's what makes storytelling powerful. I mean, the if you just want something that's going to go on with more incident and event and drama and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, without it ever actually building to a conclusion that gives you that sense of catharsis, you can just live. I mean, that's what we do. That's just normal. And you can't have a good story that doesn't end.
Yeah,
I think I was just going to say, I think it's there are so many examples we can think of probably immediately of stories that should have ended neatly and were dragged out for whatever reason, commercial reasons largely. In a lot of the case.
Absolutely. And there's a certain point at which the commercial considerations need to be turned away from. I mean, there's a certain point at which either you are committed to getting rich or making good art. Now, I'm in the enviable position of it's really will I get richer or make good art? And I'm okay. I'm good. I'm if I don't get the next big contract because it's not an Expanse book, I'm gonna be all right.
Yeah.
And I would rather have something that is artistically successful at this point.
Yeah.
And that said, we've already sold the next trilogy after the Expanse, so that I get to say that because I know what the next thing looks like. It's fine. I'm going to be okay. So that's a little disingenuous on my part.
But even the commercial considerations can, they can backfire because people don't want, consciously or subconsciously, they also want an ending to they can say that they love that and they want it to go on forever, but there's TV shows that have tried to go on longer than they should have, and the audience gives up on it anyway because it's not going anywhere, kind of a thing.
Well, everything does end. I mean, that's any of these projects will eventually end. That's true, and it will either end in a David Bowie's Black Star style celebration and blowout that leaves everybody just floored, or it will trickle off slowly until you've got the band that you loved in the 80s who's at the corner pub trying to belt out the stuff they did when they were 20, and it's just kind of sad. I think for myself, as with everybody, perhaps Bowie.
So what was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read was Robert Cara's The Power Broker. It's a huge brick of a book about Robert Moses and the rise to power that he had in New York and in the planning and structure of New York from the early 1900s until the 60s. And it is eerie reading that in our present environment and talking about the narcissism and power.
Awesome.
It's an amazing book.
Nice. And what about the last film that you watched?
The last thing that I watched, I mean, it was, I guess it counts as a film, is the Rest Ring table read on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that looks fun. It's not in the UK yet, I don't think, but I really, really do want to watch that.
It was charming. It was wonderful to go back and to go back into that kind of left-wing liberal fantasy of competent government. It was great. It was lovely to be there, even if it was just a sip. I haven't voted yet in the elections here, but I'm planning to go on Tuesday. I'm going in person. I'm putting an N95 mask on and then a cloth mask over that. And we're in the process. We're right now. New Mexico is spiking badly with coronavirus. We were doing okay, and we're not doing okay now. And I'm going out anyway because it's literally my duty as a citizen.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
And we're going out. We're going to do it. I will tell you the last TV show that I finished the whole project.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you have not seen The Good Place, don't let anybody tell you anything. It's 4 seasons long. It's half-hour shows. It is an undoable project. It is an impossible project that they did. Yeah. They landed the ending. It is sweet. It is thoughtful. It is challenging. It is the best intro to philosophy course I have ever been in. It is a project that has it's a network sitcom that has helped me understand the necessity of death.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, and that's a show with a very good last episode that knew when to end and didn't overstay its welcome.
And honest to God, I did not think they could do it. Yeah, I was going to think, like, how are you going to end this? I mean, okay, well, here's your premise. How do you end that? Yeah. And then they showed me how you end that. I was like, oh yeah, no, that's exactly how you end that.
Yeah. And every season you would just as it was starting to get, they would kind of stretch it out, and then the season would flip everything on its head. It would be a whole new feel to it, and they kept doing that, reinventing it every time. It was very smart.
No, the second season in particular. I mean, we got to the end of the first season, and the thing happens, and I think, okay, well, I know what the next season is going to be, and everything that I knew that they were going to do in the next season, they did in the first 2 episodes. I was like, okay, I don't know where we're going now. All right, now we're doing a thing. All right, let's see what that is. And they had something. They went from strength to strength to strength, and it was a genuinely beautiful experience the whole way through. It was just, I loved that one. I can't say enough about that show.
Nice. No, definitely agree with that. And as Marco says, the very last thing we do is a quick fire, either or. There's no right answers apart from one. So the first one is sci-fi or fantasy.
Fantasy.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Wrath of Khan, and I'm quitting.
Good answer. I like that. That's fine. TV or cinema?
TV.
Fancy restaurant or a takeaway in normal times?
Takeaway.
Okay.
Takeaway.
And last one, real book or ebook?
Real book, but only by a nose.
Okay. You must be pleased. Tarek is a big ebook advocate, so.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing about ebooks. I can take them anywhere. I've got them all the time. When I'm reading my wife to sleep, the lights can be off. It's got its own light on it. It's great that way. But I have a book that was published in 1910. It doesn't need a system update.
Yeah. Oh, that was a really, really fun chat. Really interesting.
Yeah, no, it was. I really enjoyed speaking to Daniel.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the stuff he was saying about, the attitude that people have towards genre fiction, like sci-fi and fantasy, and the comparison he made about Under the Skin being... I mean, at heart, it's a sci-fi novel, but it's very much seems.
It's a nonsense. And some of the names he mentioned there, like Ursula K. Le Guin and N.K. Jemisin, and these are amazing writers at the top of the game in any field, and yet because they write a specific type of story, you're meant to look down on them in some way. It's it's a
bizarre.
nonsense.
And the reluctance that certain authors have to label themselves
Yeah, exactly.
sci-fi or fantasy because they don't want the
baggage that comes with it. Or
baggage,
I mean, I think there's no doubt that there is a snobbery, as we said, a certain. I'm not even sure it's the readership. It's almost like. It's almost within writing itself or within publishing. There's a kind of...
Because you look at sci-fi novels or Thai novels or any kind of novel that's not a big mainstream genre, and there are tons of readers there. The readers are there. You're right. It's almost it's the people, it's the reviewers or the media or some kind of overseeing, writing body that says this stuff isn't actually.
It's not as good, or I'm not going to treat this in the same way that I would treat something from Hilary Mantel, which is, Hilary Mantel's a great writer. Absolutely treat her great, but also treat a sci-fi writer if they've written a great sci-fi book, and the genre shouldn't matter in any way whatsoever.
No, and then there's people who seem to break through that, like Arthur C. Clarke, Terry Pratchett. There's certain people who break through a genre and are famous and are loved, and they're cool. That's great. And then there's many more who don't, and I don't really understand what the difference is between them.
And it's actually the same, although I think it is getting better. But just from the point of view of a lot of our listeners are people that write and want to be published, and if you're looking for an agent, certainly in the UK, there's quite a lot that sort of always have this caveat of no SFF, no sci-fi and fantasy. They just don't want to even look at it, even though it could be the best piece of writing that there's ever been. If it's in that category, they just won't look at it, which, it seems very close-minded, really.
It does, and especially when you get stuff like we've chatted to, you have to remind me of the band's name, who wrote I've actually forgotten his book that was turned into a TV show on Netflix. Richard Morgan. I don't remember. I'll get it myself. It's fine. It's low today. Richard Morgan. He is very much a sci-fi fantasy author, but his sci-fi stuff skews into that kind of crimey noir stuff. And is that something that maybe some genre authors are having to do in order to sell?
No, but like if you break it down, a very sci-fi story is also something else. A fantasy book is, you could argue that Lord of the Rings, or certainly some of the Lord of the Rings books, are war stories. But they get categorized by a certain, if you put them in the fantasy or sci-fi category, then that brings them down and people don't want to look at them. But there's plenty of sci-fi books that are crime books. There's plenty of fantasy books that are thrillers. There's, a thing can be more than one type of story. It's almost like it's the setting,
Yeah, you say fantasy and people imagine Lord of the Rings. You say sci-fi, folk imagine Star Wars. It's that kind of like reductive view, which I think is really ultimately really hurtful for genre writers, and needlessly so.
But anyway, we've gone way off track there. But
anyway,
But I mean, I really enjoyed speaking to Daniel. So really, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Daniel. And we are all looking forward to Leviathan Falls, the final book, as he said. I was a bit surprised about that, but I agree with what he says about stories ending. Having a proper ending is so important.
Yeah, and I suppose they still work on the Expanse TV show, so there's still, even once the book series ends, there's still Expanse adventures in some form to come in the future.
And it sounds like they've got plans for a brand new thing afterwards as well, which I'm sure will be great. Yeah. So, as Tarek said at the start, this is the last episode in our current run, but we will be back in about 4 to 6 weeks, probably. Certainly pre-Christmas, with some more episodes, some more great guests who we've already recorded.
A very exciting season opener
Yes, we do. A very, very exciting
in the
guest.
can.
Exactly. In the can, as they
That's
say.
lingo. That's lingo for it's been recorded.
Oh, thanks, Tarek. Oh,
Sorry.
I didn't understand that.
Leave you behind there.
But if you did enjoy the podcast and us rambling on at the end hasn't put you off, if you...
Was it still there?
Yeah, exactly. If you were able to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use, that would be great because it helps us climb the charts, which helps us to continue to get these great guests on the podcast.
And of course, if anybody wants to get in touch, they can do so by sending us an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk or a tweet to @right_gear. And, you know, people might be asking, why is it Right Gear Twitter account when you're called the Page One Podcast?
That's a very good point.
That is, of course, Right Gear is the parent company.
Yes. In our vast empire.
In our vast empire. Tools to help you tell your story is the tagline. And Page One Notebook that we've mentioned a few times is, of course, one option, and the Page One Podcast is a second.
Yeah, so please, if you are a writer, do check out our notebooks. Make a perfect Christmas present. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @UKPage1, as evidenced here. And our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.